have to sit through film after film after film and then try to find something redeeming about something that maybe doesn't have much redeeming, but they choose a lot of different films, and some of it is exciting, some of it's like watching paint dry, some of them were comedy.
They respected each other. Everyone said so. The press said so. Hollywood said so. They said so themselves. But respect is not friendship. Respect is not warmth. Respect is not closeness. And what existed between Clint Eastwood and James Garner was respect. Nothing more, nothing less, just respect. Cold, professional, permanent. They worked in the same town for decades. They knew the same people. They moved through the same studios. They attended the same events. And they never became friends. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. Because there was something between them. Not hostility, not rivalry, something quieter, something harder to name. A distance that neither of them ever tried to close. And when you look closely, when you listen to the way they spoke about each other, the pauses, the careful phrasing, the things they didn't say, you realize something. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't circumstantial. This was a choice made by both of them to stay exactly where they were, on opposite sides of a line that was never drawn but always felt. And that distance, that deliberate, respectful distance, tells you everything you need to know about who these men really were. Because some people don't need to be close to respect you, and some people respect you precisely because they keep their distance. This was not a story about hatred. It was something more complex than that, more honest than that. It was a story about two men who understood each other perfectly and chose, consciously, quietly, not to go any deeper, because going deeper would have required something neither of them was willing to give: vulnerability, softness, the admission that they needed anyone at all. Clint Eastwood built a career on self-reliance, on silence, on the belief that a man should be able to stand alone. No explanations, no apologies, no need for approval or validation or warmth. Just work, just discipline, just the refusal to ever appear weak. He didn't do vulnerability. He didn't do sentiment. He didn't do closeness. And he built an empire on that coldness, on that distance, on the idea that strength meant needing no one. James Garner built a career on the opposite, on charm, on ease, on making people believe he was the most approachable man in Hollywood. Warm, funny, down to earth. The guy you'd want to have a beer with. The guy who never took himself too seriously. But that warmth, that famous, effortless warmth, was also a wall, a performance, a way of keeping people close enough to like him and far enough away to never really know him. Because Garner didn't trust easily, and he didn't let people in. Not really. He just made them think he did. So when these two men, both private, both guarded, both masters of keeping the world at arm's length, encountered each other in Hollywood, they saw it, they recognized it, the performance, the wall, the distance, and they respected it because they understood it, because they lived it themselves. But understanding someone and wanting to be close to them are not the same thing, and Eastwood and Garner never confused the two. They worked together once, Space Cowboys, a film about aging astronauts getting one last shot at glory. 4 men, 4 egos, 4 actors who'd been stars for decades. Eastwood directed, Garner co-starred. And on set, they were professional, respectful, efficient. They knew their lines, they hit their marks, they did the work, and they kept their distance. Not coldly, not rudely, just deliberately. Because that's what worked for both of them. Proximity without intimacy. Collaboration without connection. The crew noticed, they always do. They noticed that Eastwood and Garner didn't sit together between takes, didn't share meals, didn't tell stories or joke around and bond the way Tommy Lee Jones and Donald Sutherland did. They were polite, cordial, but separate. And when the film wrapped, they shook hands, said the right things, and went back to their separate lives. Because that's what they'd always done. That's what they'd always been. Men who existed in the same world, but never in the same room. Not emotionally, not truly. And here's the thing nobody wants to admit. That was fine. It worked. They didn't need to be friends. They didn't need to be close. They just needed to respect each other's space. And they did, for decades, without drama, without conflict, without anyone ever asking why. Because in Hollywood, where everyone performs intimacy, where everyone pretends to be close, Eastwood and Garner were honest. They kept their distance, and they never apologized for it. But there was a moment, a small moment, during the press tour for Space Cowboys. A journalist asked them about their relationship, about what it was like working together after all these years. And Eastwood answered first. He said that Garner was a professional, a talented actor, someone he respected. And then he stopped talking, didn't elaborate, didn't add warmth, didn't say anything about friendship or connection or enjoying his company, just respect, and then silence. And Garner smiled, that easy, charming smile he always had. And he said something similar, that Eastwood was a great director, that it was an honor to work with him, that he admired his discipline. And then he stopped too, and the journalist waited for more, waited for the anecdote, the personal story, the moment that would make them seem like friends. And it never came, because there was no moment, no story, no friendship to perform. Just two men who respected each other and had nothing else to say. And that pause, that absence, said everything. Because what it revealed was this: they didn't need each other, not emotionally, not personally, not in any way that went beyond professional courtesy. And they were both fine with that, more than fine. They preferred it. Because men like Eastwood and Garner don't survive Hollywood by needing people. They survive by not needing anyone, by keeping their walls intact, by making sure that no matter how famous they get, no matter how much the world wants access to them, they stay unreachable. And when two people like that meet, two people who've spent their entire lives staying unreachable, they don't break down walls, they don't let each other in, they just acknowledge the walls, nod, and move on. Because they understand, and understanding is enough. Closeness would be too much.
But here's what people miss. Here's what gets lost in the narrative of two legends working together. That distance, that respectful mutual distance, wasn't neutral. It had weight. It had meaning. Because every time they chose not to go deeper, they were making a statement about who they were, about what they valued, about what they believed a man should be. Strong, independent, self-contained. And if that meant loneliness, if that meant living your entire life without ever letting anyone truly see you, then so be it. That was the cost. And they paid it, willingly, quietly, without complaint. Eastwood never spoke about it, not directly. But if you watch his films, if you pay attention to the characters he plays, the men he embodies, you see it. The loner, the drifter, the man who doesn't need anyone, who walks into town alone and leaves alone, who solves problems with silence and violence, and then disappears. That's not just a character, that's a philosophy, a way of being in the world. And it's a philosophy that doesn't leave room for closeness, for vulnerability, for the messy, uncomfortable intimacy of actually knowing someone. Garner was different, on the surface. He played characters who were warm, funny, likable. Men who had friends and families and connections. But if you look closer, if you watch Maverick, if you watch The Rockford Files, you see something else. You see men who are always alone, always moving, always keeping people at a safe distance. The charm is real, but the closeness isn't. It's an illusion, a performance, a way of making people think they know you while making sure they never do. And that was Garner's philosophy. Be liked, be admired, but never be known. So when these two men, two masters of distance, two experts in staying unreachable, worked together, they didn't fight. They didn't clash, they didn't compete. They just recognized each other, saw the wall, and left it standing. Because tearing it down would have required them to be something they weren't, something they'd spent their entire lives refusing to be. Vulnerable, open, close. And that's the tragedy. Not that they didn't become friends, but that they couldn't. That the very thing that made them successful, the walls, the distance, the refusal to need anyone, made it impossible for them to connect, even when they wanted to, even when they might have, because wanting something and being capable of it are not the same thing. And men like Eastwood and Garner, men who've built their entire identities on not needing anyone, can't just turn that off, can't just let someone in, even if that someone understands, even if that someone is exactly like them. Years passed. Garner retired. His health declined. Eastwood kept working, kept directing, kept making films about lonely men doing hard things in silence. And they never spoke. Not off-set, not privately, not in any way that suggested they'd ever been more than colleagues. And when Garner died in 2014, Eastwood didn't give a speech, didn't write a tribute, didn't share a personal memory. He released a statement, brief, respectful, controlled. The kind of statement you'd release about anyone you'd worked with, professional, appropriate, and completely impersonal. And that was honest, because that's what they were, professional, respectful, and impersonal. They never pretended otherwise, never performed a closeness that didn't exist, never lied to themselves or anyone else about what they meant to each other, which was respect. Just respect. Nothing more, nothing less. But here's what lingers. Here's what stays with you when you think about Eastwood and Garner. The question of whether they ever wanted more, whether there was ever a moment on set, between takes, during that press tour, when one of them looked at the other and thought, this could be different. We could be closer, we could be friends, and then chose not to, chose the wall, chose the distance, chose to stay exactly where they were, safe, unreachable, alone. Because that's the thing about people like this. You never know. You never know if the distance is preference or protection, if they're choosing loneliness or just accepting it, if they're content with respect or quietly wishing for something more. And they'll never tell you. Because telling you would be a vulnerability, an admission, a crack in the wall. And men like Eastwood and Garner don't crack. They just stand there, silent, strong, alone, and call it dignity. They made a film about aging men getting one last chance, one last mission, one last moment of glory before the world moved on without them. And in a way, that's what their relationship was. One last chance, one last opportunity to let someone in, to break down the wall, to admit that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be alone, that respect could turn into friendship, that distance could turn into closeness, that two men who understood each other could actually know each other. But they didn't take it. They chose the wall, the distance, the respect. And when it was over, when the film wrapped, when the press tour ended, when Garner's health failed and Eastwood kept working, they were exactly where they'd always been, on opposite sides, close enough to see each other, far enough to stay safe, and neither of them ever tried to cross. Some distances are chosen, some walls are deliberate, and some men, no matter how much they respect each other, no matter how much they understand each other, will never be close. Because closeness requires something they don't have, or won't give, or stopped believing in long ago. And you can't force it, you can't create it, you can't make two people want connection when they've built their entire lives around not needing it. Clint Eastwood and James Garner respected each other. Everyone said so, and it was true. But respect is not friendship. Respect is not warmth. Respect is not closeness. It's just respect. And sometimes that's all two people can give, even when they're standing right next to each other, even when they're working together, even when the world expects more. They gave what they could, which was distance, professional, respectful, permanent. And when it ended, when Garner died and Eastwood released that brief, controlled statement, no one was surprised, because that's who they'd always been. Two men who respected each other, and nothing more. And nothing more was ever going to happen. But there's something else that needs to be understood, something that goes deeper than just two men keeping their distance, because what Eastwood and Garner represented, what they embodied, was a dying breed, a generation of men who believed that privacy was sacred, that boundaries were necessary, that you didn't owe anyone access to your inner life, not the press, not the public, not even your colleagues. And in Hollywood, a place built on exposure, on revelation, on the constant demand to share everything, they were anomalies, relics of a different time, a different code. And that code, that old-school belief in keeping yourself to yourself, is what connected them, or rather what kept them connected at a distance, because they both understood what it cost, the loneliness, the isolation, the way people would always want more from you than you were willing to give, and they'd both made peace with that cost, had decided long ago that it was worth it, that protecting yourself was more important than being known, that dignity mattered more than warmth.
Eastwood talks about this sometimes. Not directly, never directly. But in interviews, when people ask him about his private life, about his relationships, about the way he keeps the world at arm's length, there's always the same response. a shrug, a half smile, and some version of, "I don't think people need to know everything." It's not defensive. It's not apologetic. It's just a statement of fact, a philosophy he's lived by for 70 years and will die living by. Garner said something similar once in one of his last interviews. Someone asked him why he never wrote a tell-all memoir, why he never sold out his friends or shared the dirt or gave Hollywood what it wanted, which was confession, scandal, revelation. And Garner looked at the interviewer and said, very simply, "Because some things aren't for sale." And that was it. That was his entire philosophy. Some things aren't for sale. Some parts of yourself you keep, no matter what anyone offers, no matter how much they want it. And that's why they understood each other, because they'd both spent their entire careers refusing to sell what Hollywood wanted most: access, intimacy, the illusion that you knew them. Other actors gave that freely, sold it, built careers on it, went on talk shows and cried and shared their trauma and made audiences feel close to them. But Eastwood and Garner never did. They showed up, did the work, and left. And if people felt distant from them, if people complained that they were cold or closed off or hard to know, they didn't care, because that was the point. Distance was the point. But here's what people don't talk about. Here's what gets left out of every analysis of men like this. That distance, that carefully maintained distance, comes from somewhere. It's not natural, it's not effortless, it's learned, built, constructed over years of small betrayals and disappointments and moments where you trusted someone and they let you down, or you let yourself be vulnerable and it was used against you, or you opened up and immediately regretted it. Eastwood learned it early, grew up during the Depression, watched his father struggle, watched his family move from town to town, job to job, never settling, never secure. And he learned, the way kids learn these things, that you couldn't count on anyone, that people would let you down, that the only person you could trust was yourself. And he carried that into adulthood, into Hollywood, into every relationship and every film and every interaction. The belief that if you wanted something done right, you did it yourself. And if you wanted to stay safe, you stayed alone. Garner learned it differently, but he learned it just as deeply. He grew up in Oklahoma, lost his mother when he was young, was raised by a stepmother who didn't want him, who abused him, who made him feel unwanted in his own home. And he learned, the hard way, that charm was survival. That if you smiled the right way, if you made people like you, they wouldn't hurt you. But liking you and knowing you are not the same thing. And Garner made sure, absolutely sure, that no one ever got close enough to hurt him again. The charm was real, but the wall behind it was thicker than anyone knew. So when these two men met, two men who learned in different ways that closeness was dangerous, they didn't need to explain themselves to each other. They just knew. They saw it. The armor, the performance, the way they both moved through the world, keeping everyone at exactly the right distance. And they respected it because they lived it, because they understood that it wasn't coldness, it was self-preservation. But understanding something and talking about it are not the same thing, and Eastwood and Garner never talked about it, never sat down and said, "I know why you are the way you are. I know what you're protecting. I know what it costs." Because saying it out loud would have been a vulnerability, an admission, a crack in the armor, and neither of them could afford that. So they just coexisted. Two men with the same wound, the same fear, the same wall. And they never acknowledged it, because acknowledging it would have made it real. And keeping it unspoken, keeping it buried, was how they stayed strong. And that's the real tragedy of their relationship. Not that they weren't close, but that they could have been. That they had more in common than almost anyone else in Hollywood, that they understood each other in a way that most people never understand anyone. But that understanding, that deep, unspoken recognition of shared pain wasn't enough to bridge the distance, because the distance wasn't about lack of understanding. It was about fear. The fear that if you let one person in, the wall would crumble, and everything you'd built to protect yourself would fall apart. So they stayed where they were, safe, protected, alone, and called it strength.
There's a scene in Space Cowboys that feels like it was written for them, even though it wasn't, even though the screenwriter had no idea what was happening between Eastwood and Garner on that set. But there's a moment, a quiet moment, where Garner's character and Eastwood's character are sitting together, not talking, not doing anything, just existing in the same space. And you can feel it. The weight of two men who know each other, who recognize something in each other, but who will never say it out loud, who will never close the distance, because closing the distance would require something neither of them has left to give. And when that scene ended, when the cameras stopped rolling, Eastwood and Garner went back to their separate corners, separate trailers, separate lives. Because that's what they did. That's what they'd always done. And that scene, that moment of unspoken recognition was as close as they would ever get. Not because they didn't want more, but because wanting more and being capable of it are not the same thing. And they weren't capable. Not anymore. Maybe they never were.
Years after Space Cowboys wrapped, someone asked Tommy Lee Jones what it was like working with Eastwood and Garner. And Jones, who's not known for being warm himself, said something interesting. He said, "They're both pros. They show up, they do the work, they don't waste time." And then he paused and added, "But I don't think I ever saw them have a real conversation." And the interviewer asked what he meant, and Jones just shrugged and said, "They talked about the script, about the shots, about the work, but they never talked. You know what I mean?" And that's it. That's the whole story in one observation. They talked, but they never talked. They were in the same room, but they were never in the same room. They worked together, but they never worked together. Because working together, really working together, requires trust. And trust requires vulnerability. And vulnerability was something neither of them could afford. So they gave what they could, which was professionalism, respect, competence. And when the job was done, they walked away. Clean, simple, no mess, no emotion, no lingering connection, just the work and the distance, and the unspoken agreement that this was enough, that this was all it would ever be, that neither of them expected more, or wanted more, or could handle more. But did they ever regret it? Did Eastwood ever lie awake at night and think about Garner and wonder what it would have been like to actually know him? To sit down over a drink and talk about something real? To let the wall down for just one moment and see what happened? Did Garner ever do the same? Did they ever feel the weight of that distance and wish, just for a second, that they'd chosen differently? We'll never know, because neither of them would ever say. Because saying it would be an admission of need, of loneliness, of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the wall wasn't strength. Maybe it was fear. And men like Eastwood and Garner don't admit fear. They don't admit need. They don't admit that the armor they've worn for 70 years is heavy, that it hurts, that sometimes they wish they could take it off. They just wear it until they die, and take whatever they felt, whatever they wanted, whatever they wished for, to the grave with them. And that's what Eastwood did when Garner died. He took whatever he felt and buried it in that brief, controlled statement, in that professional, respectful distance, because that's all he knew how to do. That's all he'd ever done. And changing now, after 70 years of being one way, was impossible, even if he wanted to. Even if Garner's death made him realize something, made him feel something, made him wish he'd done things differently. He wouldn't say it. He wouldn't show it. He would just release the statement and move on, and keep working, and keep living the way he'd always lived, alone, protected, strong. And if anyone asked if he missed Garner, if anyone tried to push deeper, to get him to reveal something real, he would shut it down, politely, firmly, the way he always did. Because some distances don't close. They just exist, quietly, permanently, without explanation or apology. And this one always did. Not because they hated each other, not because they didn't respect each other, but respect was all they could give and all they could receive. And neither of them knew how to ask for more or how to give it. They were trapped by their own walls, by their own armor, by their own belief that needing someone was weakness. And so they lived their entire lives, decades in the same industry, the same town, the same world,
and never really knew each other, never really connected, never really let the other one in. And when it ended, when Garner died and Eastwood released that statement, the distance remained, permanent, unbroken, a monument to two men who understood each other perfectly and chose to stay alone anyway. That's not a tragedy in the traditional sense. There was no betrayal, no falling out, no moment of explosive conflict. Just two men who spent their entire lives building walls. And when they finally met someone else who understood walls, who lived behind walls, who respected walls, they didn't tear them down. They just stood on opposite sides, acknowledged each other, and stayed exactly where they were. And maybe that's the saddest kind of tragedy, the quiet kind. The kind where nothing happens, where nothing changes, where two people have every opportunity to connect, and they just don't. Because connection requires something they don't have, or won't give, or stopped believing in so long ago they can't remember what it felt like. Clint Eastwood and James Garner respected each other. Everyone said so, and it was true. But respect is not warmth. Respect is not closeness. It's just respect. And sometimes that's all two people can give, even when they're standing right next to each other, even when they're working together, even when the world expects more, even when, maybe, just maybe, they want more themselves. But wanting something and doing something about it are not the same thing, and Eastwood and Garner never did anything about it. They just lived with the distance, and the distance became who they were, not just to each other, but to themselves. A reminder that they'd chosen safety over connection, armor over intimacy, strength over vulnerability. And that choice, that decades-old choice, was final, irreversible, permanent. And when Garner died, that distance died with him, because whatever small possibility had existed, whatever tiny chance that maybe one day they'd break through, was gone. And Eastwood knew it. And maybe that's why the statement was so brief, so controlled, because there was nothing left to say, no way to go back, no way to undo 70 years of distance, no way to tell Garner, now that he was gone, that maybe he'd understood him better than anyone, that maybe he'd wanted to know him, that maybe the wall had been a mistake. Or maybe Eastwood didn't feel that way at all. Maybe he looked at that wall and felt nothing but relief. Relief that he'd stayed protected, that he'd never let anyone in, that he'd lived his entire life on his own terms and never compromised, never weakened, never needed anyone. We'll never know, because Eastwood will never say, and Garner can't. And the distance, that quiet, respectful, impenetrable distance, is all that remains. A space between two men who spent their entire lives in the same world and never really met. Not where it mattered, not where it counted, not in any way that would have required them to be something other than what they were. Two walls, standing next to each other, recognizing each other, respecting each other, and never, not once, not ever, coming down.